The rain came down in sheets, cold and unforgiving. Delilah Harper held her daughter, Rose, so tight she could feel the baby's tiny heart beating against her own ribs. The words of her father were a storm inside her head, louder than the thunder rolling across the Montana plains. No daughter of mine. You are dead to us. Montana in 1876 wasn't a place for women like her. A mother with no husband, a daughter with no family. She was an anchorless ship in a raging sea, and the town of Pinterest was a rocky shore, not a harbor. The main street was a river of mud. Her arms burned from the weight of the child, but she couldn't stop. Night was coming. Her stomach felt like a hollowed-out gourd. It had been more than a day since she'd eaten, since before the door to her childhood home had slammed shut forever. Every shop she passed, she felt eyes on her back. Eyes that knew her story without a single word. A ruined woman. A fallen dove. Doors didn't just close, they sealed themselves shut. She saw a woman sweeping a boardwalk, and desperation made her bold. "Please," Delilah whispered, her voice raspy. "Is there any work? I can cook. I can clean." The woman's face softened for a second, a brief flicker of sun through the clouds. Then it hardened again into cold stone. "Not with a baby," she said, not unkindly, but with the finality of a judge's gavel. "Not in this town." Hope was a guttering candle, and the rain was putting it out. At the town's only hotel, the owner just looked at Rose, then at Delilah, and shook his head. He didn't even let her speak. The sun went down, and the last of her hope went with it. Rose began to cry, a thin, hungry wail that cut Delilah to the bone. She saw the swinging sign of a saloon, the Golden Spur. It was a devil's den, a place no decent woman would ever go. But Rose was cold, and pride was a warmth she could no longer afford. Taking a breath that felt like swallowing broken glass, she pushed through the bat-wing doors. The noise inside stopped. It didn't fade. It just stopped, like a heart that had ceased to beat. Every single man in that smoky, whiskey-soaked room turned to stare. The piano went silent. A bottle paused halfway to a glass. They stared at the drenched woman and her screaming child. "You're in the wrong place, miss," the bartender called out, his voice flat. Delilah's legs wanted to give way, but she forced them to hold her up. She stood taller. "My kind?" she asked, her own voice surprising her with its strength. "You mean mothers?" A few of the men laughed, a low, ugly sound. Most just looked away, ashamed or uncomfortable. She knew what they were thinking. She was filth. She was a problem to be swept away. "Please," she begged, the strength crumbling. "My baby needs milk. I need a job. I'll do anything." The silence that answered was heavier than any sound, broken only by Rose's desperate cries. It felt like an eternity, a final judgment. Then, from a dark corner, a chair scraped against the floorboards. A man stood up. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his face hidden in the shadow of his hat. He walked toward her, and the jingle of his spurs was the only sound in the world. He didn't look at her. He looked at the bartender. "Barkeep," his voice was low, like rocks grinding together. "Bring the lady a plate of stew, and milk for the child." He turned his head slightly, and she could see a strong jaw and the hint of a days-old beard. He gestured to his table in the corner. "Ma'am, join me." Whispers erupted through the room, a current of shock. Delilah knew who he was now. Blake Morgan, the most powerful cattle rancher in the territory. A man whispered about in reverent, fearful tones. She'd seen him from a distance back when she was still a merchant's respectable daughter. "I can't pay you," she stammered, shame burning her cheeks hot. "I'm not asking for payment," he said, his voice simple and direct. "A child is hungry. A mother needs to eat." She looked at the faces in the saloon, twisted with judgment. Then she looked at this man, who offered a lifeline. It was no choice at all. She followed him to the table, every step feeling like a mile. As soon as she sat, as soon as the warmth of the room began to seep into her bones, Rose's cries softened to whimpers. Blake Morgan took off his hat. He had dark, messy hair and eyes as blue as a mountain lake. There was no judgment in them, only a quiet, unreadable intensity. "Blake Morgan," he said. "Delilah Harper, and this is Rose." The bartender brought a steaming plate of stew, a chunk of bread, and a tin cup of milk. Blake pushed it all toward her. "Eat," he commanded more than suggested. She ate like a wolf, forgetting every lesson her mother had ever taught her about manners. While she did, Blake took Rose from her. He held the baby awkwardly, his large, calloused hands looking impossibly huge. But Rose didn't cry. She just stared up at him. "You're good with her," Delilah said, her throat tight. "My sister has a few," he replied, his gaze fixed on the baby. "It's been a while." When the food was gone, a fragile strength returned to her limbs. "Thank you, Mr. Morgan. I won't forget this. Where are you staying tonight?" he asked, and just like that, the strength vanished. "I don't know," she whispered. The bitter truth hung in the air. "No one will take me in. Not with Rose." His jaw tightened, a muscle flexed, a sign of some deep, hidden anger. He was quiet for a long time, so long she thought he was going to tell her to leave. "I have a proposition for you," he finally said. He saw the fear in her eyes and added quickly, "It's a job. My housekeeper left a month ago, went back to Kansas. The place is a disaster, and I can't cook worth a damn." He looked her straight in the eye. "I need help. You need a place to stay." She studied his face, searching for the trap. There had to be a trap. Men like him didn't just help women like her. "Mr. Morgan, I have to be clear. I'm not. I won't." "Miss Harper," he cut her off, his voice gentle but firm. "I am offering you a job as a housekeeper. Nothing more. You will have your own room, separate quarters. My mother raised me to respect women, all women." The relief was so powerful it almost broke her. She wanted to weep, to collapse on the floor and thank God. Instead, she just nodded, unable to speak. "When can you start?" he asked. "Right now," she breathed. 20 minutes later, she was on the seat of his wagon, Rose wrapped in a dry blanket he'd produced from nowhere, rolling out of Pinehurst and into the dark, wet night. The ranch was 5 miles out of town. The rain had stopped and the air smelled clean of pine and damp earth. "What happened with your family?" Blake asked, his eyes on the road. "They made their feelings about my situation very clear," she said, her voice stiff. He just nodded. He didn't push. "Well, you have a place to stay now, for as long as you need it." Soon, a huge ranch house loomed out of the darkness, with warm light glowing in the windows. It was a fortress of a house, 2 stories of thick logs and stone. It screamed of permanence, of success, everything she had lost. "My foreman Diego must have lit the fires," Blake said. He helped her down and carried her pathetic little bundle of belongings inside. The house was exactly as he'd described it. A mess. A man's mess. Dishes, books, dust. But it was warm. It was solid. It was a sanctuary. "It's not much right now," he apologized. "It's perfect," she said, and she meant it. He showed her to a small, cozy room off the kitchen. It had its own fireplace. "I'll get a fire started for you," he said. "There's a cradle in the attic. I'll bring it down tomorrow." He turned to leave, and she had to ask, "Mr. Morgan, why?" He paused in the doorway, his broad shoulders filling the frame. "My mother always said you judge people by their character, not their circumstances," he said, his blue eyes finding hers in the dim light. "You walked into that saloon with your head held high. Not many women would have done that." He offered a small, rare smile. "Get some rest, Miss Harper. Tomorrow is a new day." After he was gone, she laid Rose on the bed and just stared at the wooden ceiling. In the span of a few hours, she had gone from outcast to homeless to this. She had a job. She had shelter. She had an ally, a powerful, mysterious man who looked at her without a trace of judgment. But as she drifted off to sleep, she couldn't shake a sliver of unease. It was all too easy, too perfect. And in the unforgiving land of Montana, nothing was ever that simple. She had a feeling that tomorrow wouldn't just be a new day. It would be a reckoning. The Morgan Ranch became her world. Under her hands, the chaotic house slowly transformed into a home. She cleaned and cooked and scrubbed until her fingers were raw, pouring all her fear and uncertainty into the work. Blake ate everything she put in front of him with a quiet appreciation that made her feel, for the first time in months, a sense of pride. Rose loved the open air. She was growing, her cheeks filling out. True to his word, Blake brought down a cradle from the attic. But he did more. One afternoon, he came back from town with a small, beautifully carved rocking horse. "For Rose," he said gruffly, placing it by the hearth. He never expected thanks, never lingered for praise. These quiet acts of kindness were like stones dropped into a still pond, sending ripples of confusion through her. Who was this man? He said he was 32, that he'd built the ranch from scratch after the war. The ranch hands, a tough group of men led by the quiet foreman Diego, treated him with a level of respect that bordered on fear. In town, she knew they gossiped about her, but no one, not a single soul, dared to speak a word against Blake Morgan. He gave her space. He was an employer, nothing more. And yet, she would feel his eyes on her as she rocked Rose by the fire. She would see him watching from the porch as she hung laundry in the sun. It wasn't a lecherous gaze. It was watchful, calculating, as if he were trying to solve a puzzle. One night, she woke to the sound of a horse outside. Not the steady gait of a ranch horse, but the frantic, desperate gallop of a horse being ridden hard. She crept to her window and peered out. A lone rider was at the main gate, a silhouette against the moon. Blake went out to meet him. They spoke in low, urgent tones she couldn't make out. A small pouch was exchanged. Then the rider was gone, swallowed by the night. The next morning, Blake said nothing. It was as if it never happened. But Delilah knew. This wasn't just a ranch, and Blake Morgan wasn't just a rancher. Her room, the old housekeeper's quarters, was simple and clean. One afternoon, while sweeping, her broom caught on a loose floorboard beneath the rug. Curiosity got the better of her. She pried it up. Underneath, wrapped in oilcloth, was a small, leather-bound diary. Her heart hammered against her ribs. It had to belong to the old housekeeper, the one who supposedly went back to Kansas to care for a sick mother. Her name was Sarah. The first few pages were mundane: recipes, notes about the weather, complaints about dust. Then the tone changed. October 12th. BM was gone for 3 days. Didn't say where. Diego lied to me, I could see it in his eyes. He said he was buying cattle in Helena, but the horses were ridden too hard for a simple trip to Helena. October 19th. A man came to the house last night. A stranger. They argued in the study. I heard my name mentioned. Why would they be talking about me? BM was angry. I have never seen him so angry. November 2nd. He knows I'm suspicious. He watches me. He pretends to be kind, but his eyes are cold. He's not what he seems. This place is not a home. It's a cage. November 5th. I found something in his office. A locked box. I think he might be a criminal, or worse. I have to get away from here. I'm afraid of what he'll do if he finds out I know his secret. The final entry gave Delilah a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. November 10th. He asked me about my family in Kansas. He knows I don't have a sick mother. He knows I don't have any family at all. He was testing me. God help me, he knows. The rest of the pages were torn out. Delilah slammed the diary shut, her hands shaking. The woman hadn't gone to Kansas. She had run. Or she had been silenced. Delilah looked out the window at the vast, empty landscape. It wasn't a sanctuary. It was a prison. And her kind, respectable employer might be a monster. She had to know more. She had to find that locked box. She put the diary back, her mind racing. She had to be careful. Every kindness from Blake now seemed like a threat. Every quiet moment felt like the calm before a storm. He was playing a game, and she and Rose were the pieces on the board. But what was the game? And what exactly was the secret Sarah had discovered? A few days later, Blake announced he and Diego were riding out to check on a herd in the north pasture. They would be gone all day. This was her chance. As soon as the sound of their horses faded, she handed Rose to Maria, Diego's wife, with a nervous smile, saying she needed to do a deep clean of the main house. Maria nodded, her dark eyes giving nothing away. Did she know? Was she part of it? Delilah walked into Blake's study. It was a man's room, smelling of leather and tobacco. Books lined the walls, but she wasn't interested in the books. Her eyes scanned the room, looking for the locked box Sarah had mentioned. It wasn't on the desk, not in the drawers, not behind the books. She ran her hands along the wall behind his heavy oak desk. Her fingers brushed against a section of wood that felt different. A knot in the grain was actually a hidden latch. She pressed it. A section of the bookshelf clicked open, revealing a hidden compartment. And inside was a small iron box. It was locked. Her father, for all his sternness, had been a practical man. He had taught her how to pick the simple locks on the shop's cash boxes and storage bins. A useful skill for a merchant's daughter, he'd said. Her fingers, though trembling, remembered the motions. She took a hairpin from her bun and went to work. After a few tense minutes, she heard a soft click. The lock sprang open. Her breath caught in her throat. She lifted the heavy lid. Inside, there was a stack of papers. On the very top was a photograph, a tintype of two young men, barely out of their teens. They stood side by side, their arms slung around each other's shoulders. They were identical. Blake had a twin brother. Beneath the photo was a stack of wanted posters. Her blood ran cold. The posters were for one man, Caleb Morgan. The name screamed at her from the page. The face in the drawing was a harsher, crueler version of Blake's, but it was unmistakably his twin. The list of crimes was long and bloody: bank robbery, train hijacking, murder. But it wasn't the crimes that made her gasp and drop the poster. It was the description at the bottom. Height, 6 feet, hair, dark brown, eyes, blue. Distinguishing marks, a small crescent-shaped scar above his left eyebrow. The salesman. The charming man with fine manners and empty promises who had passed through her town a year ago. The man who had whispered poetry to her by the river and left her with a broken heart and a child. Rose's father was Caleb Morgan, a killer, Blake's brother. This changed everything. Blake hadn't taken her in out of kindness. He knew. He must have known. Her name, the baby. He had put it all together. This wasn't a rescue. It was a capture. She and Rose weren't his housekeepers. They were bait. The sound of hoofbeats outside made her jump. He was back. He was back early. She frantically tried to put everything back, to close the box, to shut the secret panel. But it was too late. The front door of the ranch house opened. His heavy footsteps echoed on the floorboards, coming straight toward the study. She was trapped. She stood frozen in the middle of the room, the wanted poster still clutched in her hand as Blake Morgan filled the doorway. He didn't look surprised to see her there. He didn't look angry. He just looked tired. His blue eyes met hers, and in them she saw the truth. He had known all along. His gaze flickered down to the poster in her hand, then back to her face. "Delilah," he said, his voice quiet. "We need to talk." The confession came out of him not in a flood, but in a slow, painful trickle, like blood from a mortal wound. He sat behind his desk, the iron box open between them, a relic of a life she couldn't have imagined. Caleb was his twin, yes, but they were night and day. Blake had joined the Pinkertons, dedicating his life to the law. Caleb had chosen the other path, a path of violence and chaos. Their lives had diverged until Caleb's crimes became too savage to ignore. He wasn't just robbing banks anymore, he was leaving bodies behind. "I didn't fight in the war," Blake said, his voice hollow. "That was a lie. I've been hunting him. For 5 years. I quit the agency because they wanted him dead. I thought I could bring him in, that I could save him." A fool's errand. Caleb was beyond saving. He told her how he'd tracked his brother across 3 territories. He'd been a ghost, always one step behind. Then he'd heard whispers of Caleb spending time near Pinterest, charming a local merchant's daughter, Daniel Harper's daughter. "When you walked into that saloon," Blake continued, his eyes full of a pain that mirrored her own, "and you said your name was Harper, and I saw the baby. I knew. I knew he had been there. I knew Rose was my blood." Delilah felt a wave of nausea. "So you brought us here?" "I had to," he said, leaning forward, his voice urgent. "He's not just a thief, Delilah. He's possessive, unnatural. Anything he touches, he considers his property, forever. That includes you, and that includes his daughter. I knew if you were out there alone, he would find you, and when he did, he didn't have to finish the sentence. So you used us," she whispered, the words like acid on her tongue. "You brought us here to be a target, to draw him out." "To protect you," he countered, his voice rising for the first time. "To keep you in a place I could defend. This isn't just a ranch, Delilah. It's a fortress. Diego, the other hands, they're not just cowboys. They're the best gunmen I could find." She looked around the comfortable study, and suddenly the walls seemed to be closing in. The books, the warm hearth, the sturdy furniture. It was all a facade, a carefully constructed trap, and she and her innocent daughter were the cheese. "And Sarah?" she asked, her voice cold. "The housekeeper? Did you hire her to be bait too?" Blake flinched. "No, Sarah. She figured it out. She found the box, just like you did. I gave her money, a lot of it, and put her on a stagecoach to California myself. I made her promise to disappear, for her own safety." He ran a hand through his hair. "It's better that you think she ran in fear. It's better that the whole town thinks I'm some kind of monster. It keeps people away. It keeps things quiet." So the town's fear wasn't for her. It was of him, of the trouble he had brought to their doorstep. "What now?" she asked, her mind numb. "Now, we wait," he said grimly. "He knows you're here. My sources tell me he's been seen in the area. He's watching. He's waiting for the right moment to come and claim what he believes is his." Delilah stood up, her legs shaking. Betrayal and terror warred within her. This man hadn't saved her. He had merely offered a more gilded cage. She was his prisoner as surely as if he had locked her in chains. "I want to leave," she said. "You can't," he replied, his voice flat. "Walking off this ranch now would be suicide. For you and for Rose. You saw the posters. You know what he's capable of. The only chance you have is with me, right here." He was right. She knew he was right. She had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. She was trapped in a fortress with a man who had lied to her from the moment they met, waiting for a killer to come for her child. She looked at Blake Morgan, the stranger who knew her darkest secret. "If anything happens to her," she said, her voice dropping to a deadly whisper, "if he even lays a hand on my daughter, I will kill you myself." His blue eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw something beyond the watchfulness, beyond the grim determination. She saw respect. "I know," he said softly. "I wouldn't expect anything less." The waiting was a special kind of hell. Every day was a performance. Delilah cooked, she cleaned, she played with Rose. But underneath, a screaming tension hummed. She watched Blake, trying to see the hunter, the Pinkerton agent, beneath the rancher's disguise. He was teaching her, without saying it, how to be vigilant. He showed her how to load and fire a pistol, his hands covering hers, his touch impersonal and professional. "Just in case," he said. The ranch hands were different now, too. They moved with a purpose she hadn't noticed before. They weren't just mending fences, they were reinforcing them. Diego spent hours on the roof of the main house, his gaze sweeping the horizon. The fortress was preparing for a siege. One evening, a week after the confession, it began. Delilah was putting Rose to bed when she heard a faint thwack against the front door. She froze. Blake was already moving, a pistol appearing in his hand as if from thin air. He motioned for her to stay back. He opened the door a crack, then wider. Stuck in the wood was a hunting knife. Pinned beneath it was a small silk ribbon. It was identical to the one Delilah had been wearing in her hair that very morning. There was no note. There didn't need to be. It was a message. "I am here. I am watching. I can get to you whenever I want." The psychological war had started. Little things would appear. A child's wooden toy whittled from pine, left on the porch railing. A single perfect wild rose, his namesake for their daughter, placed on her windowsill during the night. Caleb was playing with them, tightening the noose, enjoying their fear. Delilah felt like she was losing her mind. She barely slept. Every creak of the house, every hoot of an owl, sent a jolt of terror through her. Her only solace was Rose, her innocent, happy daughter, who knew nothing of the monsters circling her home. Then, one afternoon, a lone rider appeared on the horizon. He wasn't riding hard or fast, just a slow, steady approach. Diego shouted a warning from the roof. Blake grabbed his rifle and stood on the porch, Delilah behind him, her own pistol heavy in her hand. This was it. The attack was coming. But as the rider drew closer, Delilah's blood ran cold for a completely different reason. It wasn't Caleb. It wasn't one of his men. It was her father. Daniel Harper rode up to the ranch house and dismounted, his face a mask of grim determination. He wasn't carrying a small travel bag. He was carrying a Winchester rifle. "Father?" Delilah gasped. "What are you doing here, Mother?" "Your mother is fine," he said, his voice gravelly. He didn't look at her. He looked at Blake. "He came to the farm." "Caleb," Blake stated. It wasn't a question. "He was looking for her," Daniel said, finally glancing at his daughter. "Asked questions. Said he heard she'd had a child, a pretty little girl. He described her perfectly." The agony on her father's face was terrible to see. "He said he was coming to collect his property." A choked sob escaped Delilah's lips. Then her father looked her straight in the eye, and she saw a deep, ancient shame. "I have to tell you something, girl. The truth. I didn't cast you out just because of the shame. I knew who that salesman was. Not his name, but I'd heard the stories. A dark man passing through, leaving trouble in his wake. When I found out you were with child, I was terrified for you. I thought if I sent you away, made you disappear, he would never find you. That you'd be safe." His words hit her like a physical blow, his cruelty, his rejection. It had all been a desperate, twisted attempt to protect her, a misguided act of love. "I was a fool," he said, his voice breaking. "I drove you from one monster right into the territory of another. I came here to make it right. I'm not leaving. When he comes, I'll be here to help you send him to hell." Blake, who had been listening silently, gave a slow nod. "Glad to have you, Mr. Harper." Her father had come to fight for her. For them. Delilah looked at her father, the stern, unbending man who had broken her heart. and saw only a terrified parent willing to die for his child. Tears streamed down her face, but for the first time in a long time, they weren't tears of sorrow. They had an ally. The family she thought she had lost was here, ready to stand with her. Caleb Morgan might be coming for his property, but she and everyone she loved was going to be ready for him. The arrival of her father changed the grim calculus of their survival. Daniel Harper knew this land, every creek bed and ravine, in a way Blake's hired guns never could. The three of them, Delilah, Blake, and her father, sat around the study table late into the night, a map spread between them, forming a council of war. "He'll come from the south," Daniel said, his calloused finger tracing a line through a series of rocky outcrops. "It's the best cover. He can get his men within 100 yards of the house before we'd ever see them in the dark." "My men are posted there," Blake countered. "They have orders to shoot anything that moves." "He'll expect that," Delilah said, her voice quiet but firm. Both men turned to look at her. "He's been playing with us, leaving tokens, trying to scare us. This isn't just a raid for him. It's a performance. He wants an audience. He'll want to get inside the house. He'll want to see my face when he takes Rose." A chilling silence fell over the room. She was right. They all knew it. "Then we let him in," Blake said, his eyes locking with hers. "On our terms. They worked out a plan, a brutal, dangerous plan. They would pull the guards from the south side, make it look weak, an invitation. They would let Caleb and a few of his men breach the house. Daniel and two of the hands would be waiting in the loft of the great room, hidden in the shadows. Blake would confront his brother head on. And Delilah's role? It was the most important of all. She and Rose would be in her bedroom, the one off the kitchen. It had a reinforced door, but it also had a window that led out to a small walled-in garden where she grew herbs. "When the shooting starts," Blake instructed, his hands gripping her shoulders, "you take Rose and you go out that window. You hide in the root cellar. You do not come out. No matter what you hear, do you understand me?" She nodded, but in her heart, she knew it was a lie. She would not hide while they fought for her. She would not be a damsel in distress waiting to be rescued. She was a mother, and a cornered mother is the most dangerous animal on God's green earth. The next 2 days were an agony of waiting. The sky was a hard, brilliant blue, and the air was still. It felt wrong, like the world was holding its breath. Delilah went about her routine, but her senses were heightened to a painful degree. She could hear the frantic beating of her own heart in the silence. She made one small alteration to their plan. She spent an hour in the kitchen, packing a small satchel not with escape supplies, but with jars of lard, flour, and a small pouch of the hottest chili powder she used for Diego's favorite stew. She also took several dish rags and a bottle of kerosene from the lamp supply. She hid the satchel in the garden just beneath her bedroom window. On the third night, it happened. The moon was a sliver in the sky. A dog barked in the distance, then went silent. It was the only warning they got. Delilah was in her room, rocking Rose, humming a lullaby. She was fully dressed, her pistol tucked into the waistband of her skirt. Blake was in the main room, pretending to read by the fire. Her father and the others were in the loft, silent as ghosts. Then came the sound of splintering wood as the back door burst open. Shouts erupted. The roar of a shotgun blast echoed through the house, so loud it felt like it shook her bones. Rose woke with a startled cry. Delilah didn't hesitate. She scooped her up, unlatched the window, and slipped out into the cold night air of the garden. But she didn't run for the root cellar. She grabbed the satchel. With Rose clutched to her chest, she crept along the side of the house, her heart feeling like it would explode. The garden wall kept her hidden in shadow. From inside, she could hear the chaos of the fight. Gunshots, curses, the crash of furniture. She peeked through the main room window. It was a scene from a nightmare. Blake and Caleb were circling each other in the center of the room, two sides of the same dark coin. Her father was firing down from the loft, providing cover. One of Caleb's men lay dead near the hearth, but another was setting fire to the curtains, smoke already beginning to fill the room. And a third man was breaking away, heading for the hallway that led to her bedroom. He was coming for them. Delilah knew what she had to do. She couldn't let him get to the bedroom and discover they were gone. He would raise the alarm. She had to intercept him. She handed the sleeping Rose to Maria, who had been hiding with the other women in the cellar as planned. "Keep her safe," Delilah whispered, pressing the pistol into Maria's hands. "Bar the door." Then, taking a deep breath, Delilah slipped back into the house through the kitchen entrance. The gunman was halfway down the hall. He hadn't seen her. The house was thick with smoke, and the noise of the fight was deafening. She moved like a phantom. She uncorked the jar of lard and smeared it silently all over the wooden floor in front of her bedroom door. Then she sprinkled the chili powder over it, a trick she'd learned from a ranch hand to keep pests out of the chicken coop. She flattened herself into a small alcove as the gunman reached the end of the hall. He kicked open her bedroom door, expecting to find a terrified woman and a crying baby. Instead, his boots hit the grease. His feet flew out from under him. He went down with a surprised grunt, his gun skittering across the floor. Before he could recover, Delilah was on him. She didn't scream. She didn't hesitate. She threw the entire bag of flour into his face. He came up sputtering, blinded, a comical white ghost in the smoky darkness. As he gasped for air, he inhaled a lungful of chili powder. The effect was instantaneous. He began to choke, to claw at his eyes, his throat on fire. He was completely incapacitated. One threat down. She turned her attention back to the main room. The fire was spreading, climbing the walls. Her father was still firing from the loft, but the smoke was getting thick. Blake and Caleb were locked in a brutal, desperate fight, trading blows. Blake was a trained agent, but Caleb fought with the savagery of a rabid animal. Delilah grabbed one of the kerosene-soaked rags. She had to end this. She had to give them an escape route. She ran to the front of the house, to the heavy drapes by the main window. She lit the rag. With a prayer on her lips, she threw the makeshift torch into the curtains. They went up in a whoosh of flame. It was a terrible risk, fighting fire with fire, but she knew it was the only way. It would create a second blaze, a wall of fire that would force Caleb and his remaining man back toward the already open rear door. It would split their attention and create an exit for Blake and her father. As flames consumed the front of the room, creating a terrifying new source of light and heat, Blake saw his chance. He landed a solid blow to Caleb's jaw, sending him stumbling backward. "Now, Daniel!" Blake roared. Her father and the other men leaped from the loft, landing on the floor and making a run for the back door. The plan was working. They were getting out. But Caleb wasn't running. He was laughing. A wild, unhinged sound. He saw Delilah standing there, her face smudged with soot, a terrifying angel of vengeance in the firelight. "There you are!" he snarled, his eyes burning with a mad possessiveness. "I should have known you weren't the hiding type." He lunged for her. Blake intercepted him, tackling him to the floor. They rolled over and over, two brothers, two halves of a whole, locked in a battle to the death amidst the flames of the home they were destroying. "Get out!" Blake screamed at Delilah. "Get out of the house!" She backed away toward the kitchen, but she couldn't leave him. Not now. The ceiling groaned above them. The house was coming down. Caleb gained the upper hand. He pinned Blake to the floor, his hands wrapping around his brother's throat. Blake's face began to turn purple. Caleb was going to kill him. Delilah looked around frantically. Her gun was gone. There was no weapon. Then her eyes landed on the rocking horse Blake had given Rose. With a scream of pure rage, she grabbed the heavy carved toy. She lifted it high above her head, all her strength, all her fear, all her love for her daughter and the man on the floor fueling the motion. She brought it down with all her might on the back of Caleb Morgan's head. There was a sickening crack. Caleb's body went limp. He collapsed on top of his brother, unconscious or dead. Blake pushed the body off him, gasping for air. He stared at Delilah, his eyes wide with shock and something else. Awe. A flaming beam crashed down from the ceiling, blocking the way to the back door. They were trapped. Smoke was everywhere, thick and black. They were going to die. But then, the new fire Delilah had set by the front window did something unexpected. The heat became so intense that the thick glass of the main window exploded outward, creating a rush of fresh air and a new exit. "Come on!" Blake yelled, grabbing her hand. He pulled her through the fiery opening, out onto the porch, and into the clean, cold night air. They collapsed on the ground, coughing, gasping, watching as the home Blake had built, the sanctuary she had found, was consumed by flames. Her father and Diego rushed to their side. The fight was over. Caleb's men were either dead or had fled, and Caleb himself was in the inferno. Justice had been served. They stood there for a long time, a strange, broken family, watching the fire burn itself out. The ranch house was a total loss, a blackened skeleton against the coming dawn. Daniel Harper put a hand on his daughter's shoulder. "I've never been prouder of you in my life," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Delilah looked at Blake. He was covered in soot and blood, but he was alive. His mission was over. His brother was gone. He was free. He looked at her, not as bait, not as a housekeeper, but as an equal, a partner, a warrior who had saved his life. "It's over," he said, his voice raspy from the smoke. "It's all over." She knew he wasn't just talking about the fight. He was talking about the lies, the secrets, the hunt. All of it was ash, just like the house. From those ashes they could build something new, something real. As the first rays of sun crested the mountains, Blake Morgan took her hand. His touch was no longer watchful or calculating. It was just warm. "Delilah Harper," he said, his voice soft. "The house is gone. I have nothing to offer you but a piece of land and a chance to start over. But I'm asking anyway. Will you marry me? Will you build a new life with me?" She looked at her daughter, safe in Maria's arms. She looked at her father, his face full of a newfound respect. And she looked at this man, this complicated, dangerous, honorable man who had come into her life like a storm. "Yes," she said, tears of grief and joy mixing on her dirty cheeks. "Yes, I will." They didn't just rebuild the house, they built a home. The months that followed were filled with hard work. With the help of Daniel and the loyal ranch hands, a new house rose from the ashes of the old one, stronger and brighter than before. The town of Banished, hearing the story of what had happened, of how the Morgans had faced down a terror that had haunted the territory, no longer looked at Delilah with judgment. They looked at her with respect. Even Mrs. Peterson gave a stiff but sincere nod when they passed on the street. Delilah and Blake were married by the preacher in a simple ceremony on the newly built porch, surrounded by the family they had forged in fire and fear. Rose, as the flower girl, toddled between them, a symbol of their future. Daniel Harper, his eyes suspiciously bright, gave his daughter away with a pride that healed the last of the old wounds between them. Life on the Morgan Ranch found a new rhythm, a peaceful rhythm. The nightmares of Caleb faded, replaced by dreams of the future. Blake taught Delilah how to ride, how to read a brand, how to manage the sprawling business of the ranch. She discovered she had a sharp mind for numbers and a tougher spirit than she ever knew. They were true partners, in every sense of the word. 3 years later, Delilah stood on that same porch, a gentle spring breeze teasing the loose strands of her hair. She rested a hand on her swollen belly, where their second child, a son, was growing strong. In the corral below, Blake was lifting a giggling 4-year-old Rose onto the back of a gentle pony. Her laughter, free and bright, was the most beautiful sound in the world. Her father, a frequent visitor now, sat in a rocking chair beside her, whittling a small toy for his soon-to-be-born grandson. The piece they had found was a hard-won thing, and all the more precious for it. Blake caught her eye from the corral and smiled. It was the same smile he'd given her that first day in the saloon, but it was different now. It was no longer a lifeline offered to a stranger. It was the quiet, confident smile of a man who was completely, unconditionally loved. He had looked past her circumstances and seen her character. And in the end, she had looked past his secrets and seen his heart. They had faced the worst monsters imaginable, both from the outside and from within their own families. They had fought, they had bled, and they had won. Not just a battle for survival, but a victory for love, for forgiveness, and for the chance to build a life on their own terms. The path had been a brutal one, paved with lies and fear, but it had led her here, to this porch, to this family, to this love that was as vast and resilient as the Montana sky itself. She was no longer a fallen woman. She was Delilah Morgan, a wife, a mother, a survivor, and she was, finally, home. If you enjoyed this story of survival and redemption, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales of the unexpected, and let us know in the comments, what would you have done in Delilah's shoes?